So now that we have looked at how to calculate the price elasticity demand, let's look at what it means. So let's first look at this idea of elastic versus inelastic. So let's first look at elastic. Let's say that the price elasticity demand was greater than 1. Now again, remember that when you do the price elasticity demand, you look at it in absolute terms. All right, so just because it's greater than 1, there's still that inverse relationship where price goes up, causes quantity demand to go down. So so we're saying that it's greater than 1. That means that percentage change in quantity over percentage change in price, which is price elasticity demand, if it's greater than 1, it's saying that that percentage change in quantity is larger than that percentage change in price. So when that's the case, it's saying that demand is very responsive. Right? It's very sensitive to prices and change, because whatever percentage-wise price goes up by, quantity demand is going to go down by a larger percentage, and vice versa. Now, this can go up to perfectly elastic demand, which is equal to infinity. It's saying that an infinitely small change in the price can lead to an infinitely large change in the quantity demanded. But the basic idea is that the larger that price elasticity demand becomes, the more sensitive it becomes to a change in the price. Right? The larger effect a change of the price will have on how many units are demanded of that good. All right, so that's elastic demand. Inelastic demand, where the price elasticity of demand is less than 1. Now again, it can't be 0. It can't be negative, so it's just between 0 and 1 basically. It's saying that demand is not very sensitive to changes in price. It's saying that, price can go up, but demand is going to go down by a lesser amount, percentage-wise. So, for example, if price goes up by 1%, quantity demand is going to go down by less than 1%. If it's inelastic, if price goes up by 5%, quantity demand is going to go down by less than 5%. So with inelastic demand, quantity demand is not very responsive to changes in price. And in the extreme example, it's 0, which is where quantity demand is really just not affected by changes in price. Right? It doesn't happen. So price can go up and down plenty. Not going to happen, or it's not going to really affect it. And so then you have unit elastic, which is basically a 1-for-1 percentage-wise trade-off. Price goes up by 1%, quantity demand goes down by 1%. So let's see what they look like. So here are the cases of the perfectly. So this is perfectly inelastic demand, this first one here. All right, as you can see, it's perfectly vertical. So when you have this, an infinitely large change in the price is going to have an infinitely small change in the quantity demanded. And so if that's the case, thinking about the equation, so percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price, so you have very small, infinitely small change in the quantity over an infinitely large change in the price. So a very, very small number over a very, very large number, that fraction is going to lead to a number pretty much 0. Elastic demand, let's look over the third one here, is infinity, where it's infinitely large, to where you can have an infinitely small change in the price leading to an infinitely large change in the quantity demanded. So if you think about that, if you have a percentage change in quantity demanded, very, very large, over percentage change in price, very, very small, gets towards infinity. And this is what a unit elastic demand looks like. So as you look at this, all right, here's always a good trick that I like to teach. Perfectly inelastic, vertical. Perfectly elastic, horizontal. So if you look at it here, okay, this is perfectly inelastic. So basically, the more inelastic it becomes, the more vertical it is, right? And the more inelastic it is, the less sensitive quantity demand it is to a change in the price. So if you look at that again, so the more inelastic, the more vertical. And if we look here, this perfectly inelastic demand looks kind of like the letter I. So basically, the more it looks like the letter I, the demand, the more inelastic it is. Okay? And the more, or less it looks like the letter I, the less elastic it is. Right? So that's just a little trick to look at how to approach it. So what causes this idea of elastic versus inelastic? What makes the quantity of a demand more or less sensitive, more or less responsive to price changes? All right, so let's look at some reasons why here. All right, so these are factors that influence elasticity of demand. So let's look at the first one, number of substitutes. All right, so the more substitute, and it's more elastic, more sensitive if there's more substitutes. So let's think about that. The more substitutes there are, the more elastic demand is to a change in the, or the more elastic the demand is. Meaning that, the more elastic, as price goes up, the larger the decrease in quantity. So let's think about that. Let's think about apples. Okay. So apples tend to be more on the elastic side. And part of the reason why is that there's a lot of substitutes for apples. There's oranges, there's grapes, peaches, plums, even you can also talk about cantaloupe. And then, other alternatives may just be not fruit. I can have either an apple or a tasty cake. Not exactly great substitutes, but you get the point. So with apples, there's a lot of substitutes for them. And so if the price goes up, because people know that there's a lot of things they can buy instead of apples, if the price goes up, a lot of people might say, you know what? I like apples, but not that much. All right, there's all these other things out there that are healthy that are like, I'm gonna go get some of that. And so because there's a lot of substitutes, that a small change in the price could cause a lot of people to go run to and get the some substitute for it. And so that small change in the price could cause a large change in the quantity demanded. Now, on the other side of that, if price goes down, a lot of people could say, wow, you know what, I've been having oranges, but the price of an apple is going down. I'm going to go switch over there. And the same, it could be people who have oranges and grapes and cantaloupe and all that. So you could pull a little bit from all these different groups and then bring it over to apples. So that's one. That's one thing that influences the elasticity of demand is the number of substitutes. And more substitutes, more elastic. The next one is proportion of income that you're spending on the product. And the idea is if you're spending a larger portion of your budget on the good, it's going to be more elastic. Okay. For example, in some countries, there are, paying for food takes up a large portion of their budget. Right. Not as much in the United States. But in a lot of countries, especially third world countries, they spend, 50, 60, 70, 80% of all the money they make on food. So in that case, where they're spending a larger proportion of their budget on food, a change in the price of food could cause demand to drastically change. If price goes up, right, because people have to pay for other things in addition to food, right, if price goes up, they're just going to say, wow, I only have so much money and I got to spend it somewhere, and so you could see a large drop in the quantity. On the other side, if price goes down, you could see a large increase. In the United States, you don't see food in general on a large scale being that elastic. If price goes up by 1% or down by 1%, you're going to see a minimum change in the quantity demanded of food. Okay? So again, proportion of income with the larger proportion of your income, making it more elastic, more sensitive to price. Time is another one, and time kind of goes back to number of substitutes in a way. And the idea is that the more time that passes, the more elastic demand becomes. And the reason why is that if something happens that affects price to change, over time, people are going to either search for alternatives or come from alternatives. So, for example, let's say that a bank decides to raise their overdraw fees. They raise all their fees up, right? So basically, the price of being at that bank goes up. Now, in the short run, a lot of the people who are at these banks, all right, look, it's a pain to go out and change to another bank, so I'm not going to do it. However, as they start to go out and look, what you're going to see is that more and more people are going to realize that there's more alternatives out there. There's more substitutes. And so that price change, which may have had a small effect in the short run, over the longer period, what you're going to see is that it's going to become more elastic. Okay? Because more and more people are going to be able to find these alternatives and go there. You can also find this in TV viewing options now, because what's happening is, for the most part, people are looking at Comcast and Verizon and saying, all right, well, that's really the main way. But as prices go up for either your cable, internet, whatever, they can start to shop around, and a lot of times do, and try to find more alternatives. And so it becomes more elastic to that, or because of that. So again, with the price elasticity of demand, what causes elastic versus inelastic? And again, reminding you that elastic is where quantity demand is very sensitive. The price elasticity is greater than 1. Whereas inelastic means that quantity is not very responsive. Right? The price elasticity is less than 1. So what causes something to be more elastic? If there's more substitutes, so people can switch over when there's a price change, if it's a large proportion of your budget, or if there's more time.